Crowd gathers as Keanu Reeves and Sandra Bullock walk hand in hand. The rain had stopped only a few minutes ago, leaving the city glistening like glass under the soft streetlights. The air smelled of wet asphalt and fresh coffee from a nearby cafe. People were rushing to catch their cabs, umbrellas folded and shoes splashing through shallow puddles. And then, like something pulled out from a quiet dream, two familiar figures stepped out of the hotel's side door, Keanu Reeves and Sandra Bullock, walking slowly hand in hand. No security, no red carpet, just two souls walking under the calm of the night. At first, no one noticed. The world around them moved in its usual blur, cars passing, music playing from distant bars. But when a teenage fan recognized them and whispered, the silence shifted. Heads turned, voices rose, and phones lifted in the air. Flashes started to break through the misty glow of the street. A small crowd began to gather near the corner, whispering names that carried warmth and awe, Keanu, Sandra, together again. But neither of them rushed or turned away. They just kept walking, their fingers intertwined as if that moment belonged only to them. Inside, Sandra felt her heartbeat racing. Not from fear, but from something she hadn't felt in years. A quiet comfort beside someone who understood silence the same way she did. Keanu's hand was steady, gentle, the kind that didn't demand attention but offered it. He didn't say a word, and he didn't need to. His calm presence was louder than the voices rising around them. A young reporter from a local blog tried to push closer, calling out, asking if they were back together. Sandra smiled faintly, not as an answer but as a shield. She had learned through years of fame that silence often speaks the loudest truth. Keanu simply nodded to the crowd, a gesture of kindness, not distance. The more people gathered, the more he held her hand with quiet firmness, making sure she didn't feel overwhelmed. It wasn't about the cameras or the rumors. It was about reminding her that sometimes, walking through noise with someone beside you is all that matters. As they crossed the street, memories flooded Sandra's mind. The first time they worked together, years ago, when they were both uncertain but full of hope. She remembered the long hours on set, the laughter between takes, the unspoken trust that had never faded, even after years of distance. It had been so long since she'd felt that same quiet connection, something that existed beyond the lights, beyond fame. It wasn't love defined by words or contracts, but by understanding. Keanu had always carried that rare stillness that felt like peace. A sudden shout from the back broke her thoughts. A group of fans had pushed closer, and one of them stumbled, nearly falling onto the wet pavement. Without hesitation, Keanu let go of her hand for just a second, reaching out to help the stranger up. His movements were calm, his tone kind. He asked if the person was okay, smiling softly when they nodded. It was such a simple act, yet it spoke volumes about who he was. People around him saw it too. The crowd that had gathered not only for curiosity but also for admiration began to quiet down. The noise softened, replaced by respect. When Keanu took Sandra's hand again, she looked at him with eyes that said everything she couldn't put into words. Gratitude, respect, something deeper, older, and untouched by time. In that short moment, under the dim golden streetlight, surrounded by strangers and flashing lights, it felt like the world had paused just long enough to breathe. But peace never lasts long when the world is watching. Within minutes, the moment began to twist. A rumor started spreading online. Someone claimed they saw Keanu and Sandra fighting earlier that day. Another posted a blurry video of them entering the hotel, suggesting something dramatic. Within moments, the internet began to build a story that neither of them had written. The headlines were waiting to be filled, the clicks waiting to rise. Keanu noticed the first wave of reporters approaching from the far end of the street. He leaned closer and whispered, his voice calm and low, telling her to keep walking and ignore the noise. Sandra nodded, though her heart sank a little. She had seen how quickly kindness could be turned into gossip, how a simple walk could be twisted into a scandal. But she didn't let go of his hand. She squeezed it tighter instead. For once, she didn't want to hide behind publicists or statements. She wanted to walk with her truth, however the world chose to see it. As they reached the next corner, a security car pulled up quietly beside them. The driver, recognizing Keanu, asked if they wanted to leave through the back route to avoid the growing crowd. But Keanu shook his head gently. He didn't believe in running from life, even when it became complicated. Instead, he turned to Sandra and smiled faintly, as if reminding her that this too would pass, just like the rain that had fallen before. She smiled back, the corners of her eyes softening. For the first time that evening, she felt a strange calm returning, a reminder that storms can be beautiful when faced with grace. She looked around at the people holding their phones, at the ones who weren't shouting but just watching quietly. Not everyone came to chase a story. Some were there simply to witness a rare moment of honesty between two souls who had shared years of silent connection. Then, just when the calm seemed to settle, a voice rose from the crowd, a reporter shouting a question that cut through the night. He asked if the two of them were hiding something, if this walk was just another staged act before a new movie. The tone was sharp, almost mocking. Sandra froze for a second, the words hitting harder than she expected. Keanu looked at her and shook his head slightly, his eyes soft, signaling her not to answer. But she did. Not with anger, not with defense, just with truth. She said in a quiet but firm voice that sometimes people walk hand in hand not because of contracts or scripts, but because they care. Because they have been through enough in life to know the value of being kind, even when the world misreads it. Her voice trembled slightly at the end, but it carried weight. The crowd fell silent for a moment. Even the reporter who had asked the question lowered his camera. Keanu turned to her with a look that only comes once in a lifetime, something between pride and quiet admiration. He didn't say a word, but his expression said everything. That she had spoken for both of them. They continued walking toward the car waiting near the corner. Rain began to fall again, gently, as if the sky itself had softened. Flashes returned, but now they looked less invasive, more like distant stars. The crowd wasn't shouting anymore. They were simply watching two people who had chosen dignity over drama, kindness over noise. Just as they were about to step into the car, Sandra looked back at the crowd. She saw faces, some smiling, some emotional, some simply thoughtful. In that moment, she realized that what people saw tonight wasn't a scandal or a story. It was something deeper. It was proof that in a world built on headlines and judgment, a little grace still mattered. But as the car door opened and Keanu helped her inside, something unexpected happened. One of the journalists received a call, looked shocked, and shouted something that shifted the air again. Apparently, a new report had just gone viral online. Someone had claimed to have footage from inside the hotel earlier that evening, something that could change everything. Cameras immediately turned back to them, flashes rising again. Keanu's calm face tightened slightly, his eyes narrowing, sensing trouble. Sandra's smile faded. She could tell by his silence that this was only the beginning of something much bigger. The car engine started, but neither of them spoke. The quiet between them felt heavy, uncertain. Outside, the flashes continued, and the sound of rain grew louder. Inside, their hands still rested together, steady, unshaken, but both of them knew that peace was about to end. The footage that changed everything the next morning began with silence, the kind that follows a storm before anyone realizes the sky has already cleared. Sandra sat near the window of her hotel suite, watching the city wake up. The news was everywhere. Her phone kept lighting up with notifications, headlines, tags, messages, half-truths written by strangers who had no idea what had really happened last night. She had tried to ignore it at first, but curiosity always wins. When she finally opened one of the links, her chest tightened. The video was shaky, captured from a hallway security camera, showing Keanu and her entering the hotel together. That alone shouldn't have mattered, but the clip was edited, cut in a way that made it look like they were arguing before walking into the elevator. Someone had removed the part where they laughed softly just before the door closed. The internet didn't wait for facts. Hashtags spread faster than raindrops on glass. Some said they were secretly fighting. Others said it was a publicity stunt. A few believed it was something darker. Sandra closed her eyes, breathing deeply, trying to remind herself that rumors have no face, only noise. But deep inside, she feared how this would affect Keanu. He had always been private, almost sacred in how he guarded his peace. When her phone rang, she didn't need to see who it was. Keanu's name appeared on the screen. His voice, calm as always, carried a trace of tiredness. He said he had already seen the clip and knew what people were saying. But then he said something she didn't expect, something simple, almost weightless, yet grounding. He said, "Don't explain." Not yet. Those three words lingered in her mind long after the call ended. She wanted to ask why, but deep down she already knew. Once you start defending yourself against lies, you give them power. Keanu had learned this the hard way years ago, when the world misunderstood his kindness for mystery. But staying silent was harder than she thought. She had been through fame long enough to know that silence could also be misread as guilt. Her manager called, urging her to release a statement. Her publicist suggested posting a picture to shift the story, but Sandra refused. For the first time in years, she didn't want to manage perception. She wanted to live truth quietly, even if it hurt. By afternoon, the hotel lobby was crowded again. Reporters stood outside with cameras, waiting for either of them to appear. Fans gathered too, holding phones and signs, some supportive, some curious. The calmness of last night had turned into something far more chaotic. Keanu arrived quietly through the back entrance, wearing a plain black jacket and jeans, his head slightly lowered. He didn't use security or an assistant. He never did. When he reached Sandra's suite, she was still near the window, staring out like she had been frozen there. He sat down beside her without speaking. For a long moment, there was only the hum of city traffic and the faint tapping of rain against the glass. Then she whispered, "It feels like we're trapped inside a story we didn't write." He smiled faintly, the corners of his eyes softening. "Then let's not act in it," he said. His calm made her want to cry, not because he dismissed what was happening, but because he faced it with such quiet courage. Keanu had always been like that, never chasing storms, but never running from them either. She turned to him, her voice trembling slightly. "They'll twist this, you know that. They'll say things that—" "They already are," he interrupted gently, "but the truth doesn't drown unless you let it." His words felt like a small light in the dark. She looked at him, searching for something solid to hold on to. "So what do we do now?" He leaned back in his chair, thoughtful. "We keep walking, like last night. No explanations, no anger. Just presence." His simplicity disarmed her, but it also frightened her. The world didn't forgive silence easily. It always wanted confession, spectacle, reaction. That evening, when Keanu left the hotel, the reporters were waiting. Flashes exploded again, questions thrown like stones, asking about the video, the argument, the relationship. He didn't answer. He only paused once, turned to them, and said softly, "Kindness costs nothing. Maybe try that?" Then he walked away, leaving them with words they didn't know how to sell. Hours later, Sandra watched the clip of that moment. It was everywhere too, but this time something strange happened. Instead of fueling gossip, it quieted it. Fans began posting old videos of him helping strangers, comforting crew members, listening instead of talking. People started defending him online, saying the world should stop punishing those who choose grace over drama. The tide was shifting, but not for long. The next morning, a second video surfaced. This one wasn't from security footage, it was from a hotel guest's phone. The sound was faint, but it showed Sandra standing alone near the lobby hours after Keanu left. Someone in the background shouted her name, and she turned, startled. The video cut right after that, but the internet filled in the blanks. Rumors started again, this time saying they had a fight before he left. Others said they broke up. Some said he walked out angry. She tried not to watch, but her heart wouldn't let her look away. Every edit, every fake caption felt like tiny cuts she couldn't stop. And then her manager came in, holding her phone with a worried face. "You should see this," she said softly. It was a post from an anonymous account, claiming to have screenshots of text messages between her and Keanu. The messages looked real, painfully real. They talked about a disagreement, about her walking away from a dinner they were supposed to attend together. But Sandra knew instantly they were fake. The phrasing, the tone, it wasn't him and it wasn't her. But convincing the internet would be impossible. She put the phone down slowly, her throat tight. "How far will they go?" she whispered. Her manager shook her head. "As far as people keep clicking." For the first time in years, Sandra felt something she rarely admitted, fear. Not for her image, but for the truth. The truth that once lost in the noise might never return whole. She spent the rest of the evening alone. Outside, fans were still gathered near the entrance, some holding posters of her and Keanu together, others arguing online about who was to blame. She watched them from behind the curtain, her heart breaking at the sight of people fighting over two strangers' lives. Then near midnight, her phone buzzed again. It was a message from Keanu, just one line. "Meet me at the pier tomorrow morning, no cameras there." She didn't reply, she didn't need to. The next day, dawn arrived painted in pale blue and gold. The sea was calm, waves whispering softly against the wooden posts of the pier. When Sandra arrived, Keanu was already there, sitting on a bench looking at the horizon. He turned when he heard her footsteps, smiling faintly like nothing had changed. But something had. She could see it in his eyes. They were calm, but behind them was a quiet storm, something unspoken but heavy. "I had to see you before this goes further," he said quietly. "What do you mean?" He took out his phone and handed it to her. On the screen was an email sent anonymously, threatening to release more evidence unless they made a public statement together. Sandra's heart sank. "So it's blackmail," she whispered. He nodded. "Looks like it." For a moment they both stood silent, the sound of waves filling the space between them. She looked at him, waiting for him to say what they should do. But Keanu, as always, chose honesty over panic. "They can twist what they want," he said, "but they can't take what's real." She shook her head slowly. "But the world believes what it sees, not what's real." He looked at her gently. "Then maybe it's time they saw who we really are." His words carried something deeper than she expected. They weren't about interviews or press conferences. They were about truth, about walking into the storm instead of hiding from it. The wind grew stronger, waves breaking louder against the pier. Seagulls flew overhead, crying into the morning light. For a long time, neither of them moved. Finally, Sandra whispered, "What if telling the truth makes it worse?" Keanu turned to her, his voice steady. "Then at least we'll know we didn't run." That quiet bravery moved her in a way words couldn't describe. She realized that the story wasn't about fame or gossip anymore. It was about integrity, about choosing peace even when the world demanded spectacle. As the sun rose higher, painting the water gold, Keanu stood and offered his hand. "Come on," he said softly. "Let's walk again." And so they did, two figures walking along the pier, hand in hand, not as actors, not as headlines, but as human beings choosing grace in a world that had forgotten what it meant. But just as they reached the end of the pier, a sound shattered the calm. A drone buzzed overhead, its camera lens pointed directly at them. They looked up, realizing someone had found them after all. Sandra's heart stopped. Keanu's hand tightened around hers. The peace they had built was about to break again. The drone hovered closer, its red light blinking like an eye that never blinked. And in that moment, both of them understood this wasn't just a rumor anymore. Someone was orchestrating this. Someone who wanted more than just a story. The face behind the lens, the drone's red light blinked like a heartbeat above them, silent yet piercing. Sandra felt her breath catch as Keanu stepped forward, shielding her instinctively. The drone hovered for a few seconds, capturing everything. Their hands still together, their startled faces, the morning light glinting off the water. Then it pulled back fast and vanished into the sky. They stood still for a moment, the sound of the waves muffled by the heavy silence between them. Sandra's pulse was racing, her throat dry. Keanu looked up, eyes calm but focused. He didn't move right away, as if trying to memorize the direction the drone had gone. "They knew we'd be here," he said softly. Sandra turned to him, fear flickering in her eyes. "But how?" "We didn't tell anyone." He didn't answer right away. He just looked at the horizon, his jaw tightening slightly. Then he said, "Someone close to the hotel must have leaked it. This isn't random anymore." They started walking back, slower this time. The calm that once wrapped the pier felt replaced by invisible eyes. Every step felt watched, every sound too sharp. By the time they reached the parking area, Keanu's phone vibrated. He glanced at the screen, then showed it to her. A new message. No name, no number. "You can't hide the truth forever. Release your statement or the world will see everything." The words glowed on the screen like a warning. Sandra's face went pale. "They want control," Keanu said quietly. "And they're not done yet." He called his old friend Tom, a cybersecurity expert who had helped him before when fan accounts went too far. Tom agreed to trace the source immediately. They drove back to the hotel, both silent, both knowing that the situation had crossed from rumor to manipulation. Inside the suite, the curtains were drawn. Sandra sat down, her hands trembling slightly as she replayed the drone's image in her mind. Keanu moved quietly, making tea the way he always did, careful, calm, precise. The warmth of his small gestures always softened the sharpness of chaos, but this time even that felt fragile. Tom called an hour later. His voice was steady, but his words carried weight. "I found something," he said. The email and the messages were sent from an encrypted address linked to a small PR firm. "One that used to work for your last production, Sandra." She froze. "You mean someone from the industry?" "Yes," Tom said. "And they're not amateurs. They know how to manipulate public narratives. I think they're trying to build hype for something, maybe a documentary or an expose." Keanu frowned. "So they're using us as their script," Tom sighed. "Exactly, and the more you react, the more attention they get." After the call ended, the room went quiet again. Sandra looked down at her tea, untouched. "We can't just let them control the story," she said softly. "But if we speak, they win," Keanu nodded. "That's how manipulation works. It feeds on both silence and reaction." He walked to the window, pulling the curtain slightly aside to look at the street below. Cameras waited there, flashing occasionally even though neither of them had appeared. He turned back, his voice calm but deeper now. "They want us to break. If we stay steady, they lose." Sandra admired that calm in him, but she also knew how heavy it was to carry. Fame had never broken him, yet she could see the fatigue behind his eyes. She stood and walked closer, placing her hand on his arm. "We'll face this together," she whispered. "Like we did last night, no scripts. No lies." His eyes softened. He nodded slowly. For the next few days, they stayed low. Neither posted online nor gave interviews, but the storm outside grew louder. Talk shows debated their silence. Bloggers wrote endless theories. Every move they didn't make became another headline. Then one morning, Sandra's assistant rushed into the suite holding a tablet. "You both need to see this," she said, her voice shaking. On the screen was a teaser trailer titled Behind the Truth, Reeves and Bullock. The video opened with slow, dramatic music and a voiceover claiming to reveal what really happened inside the hotel. Blurred clips, stolen moments, fabricated texts. It was all edited together to make it look like a secret scandal. And it was scheduled to release in 3 days. Sandra's hands trembled as she scrolled. The production company listed at the bottom wasn't familiar, but Tom quickly confirmed it was owned by the same PR firm that had sent the emails. Keanu sat down quietly, his face expressionless. "They're selling lies," Sandra said, her voice breaking slightly, "to millions of people, and we can't stop it." He looked up, his calm returning like an anchor. "We can, but not by playing their game." He stood, pacing slowly. "We don't fight lies with statements. We fight them with truth they can't twist." Sandra frowned softly. "And what truth is that?" He looked at her, his eyes steady. "Our kindness, our silence, our choice to rise above it. But this time, not from hiding." That night, Keanu called a trusted journalist named Lee who had known him for years, someone known for integrity, not gossip. He asked her to meet privately, not for an interview, but for something different. The next day, Lee arrived quietly at the hotel's service entrance. Sandra was hesitant at first, but Keanu reassured her. "She won't write what sells," he said. "She'll write what matters." They sat together in the quiet corner of the suite, and Keanu spoke first. He didn't talk about the rumors, the footage, or the drone. He spoke about silence, how the world rushes to fill it with noise when it doesn't understand peace. He spoke about kindness, about how it's often mistaken for weakness. Sandra added her voice too, softly but firmly, saying how truth doesn't need to be loud to survive. Lee listened, took notes, and said she would write the story differently, not as a scandal, but as a reflection on how easily humanity forgets empathy in the race for headlines. For the first time in days, Sandra felt her shoulders relax. Maybe the truth could still breathe somewhere. But peace, once again, didn't last long. That evening, while Keanu was in a meeting downstairs, Sandra received another message. This time, it wasn't anonymous. It came from someone she recognized, a producer she had once trusted named Ryan. The message was short. "You shouldn't have called the journalist. You've made it worse. Meet me alone tonight. Or everything goes public." The betrayal beneath the lights. The rain came harder that night, drumming against the city like 1,000 restless whispers. Keanu stood by the hotel window, phone pressed against his ear, listening to Tom's voice cut in and out through the static. "His name showed up again," Tom repeated. "The same one Ryan warned about, Daniel Cross." Keanu's face tightened at the name. He hadn't heard it in over a decade, but the memory came back sharp and cold. Daniel Cross, once a brilliant director, known for his vision and temper in equal measure. Years ago, Keanu and Sandra had both walked off his film after he crossed a moral line with the crew. It wasn't publicized, but it ended his career quietly, or so they thought. "He's behind all this?" Keanu asked. "He's funding the team leaking the footage," Tom said, "and he's planning to release a documentary. Something called Truth Unmasked. It's built on lies, but he has enough real footage to make it dangerous, and it's scheduled to drop tomorrow." Keanu exhaled slowly, staring out at the reflections of the city lights trembling on the wet pavement below. "We can't let him destroy her over old grudges," he said quietly. "I'm trying to shut it down," Tom replied, "but they're using offshore servers. I'll need time." "We don't have time," Keanu said, ending the call. He grabbed his jacket and headed for the door, his footsteps echoing down the hall. He didn't even realize how tense his jaw was until the elevator door closed in front of him. Every second felt heavy with the weight of the past. Sandra, meanwhile, was driving fast through the wet streets, replaying Ryan's words in her mind. She couldn't believe Daniel was behind this. Back then, he had been more than a director. He had been a mentor, almost a friend. He taught her how to trust her instincts in front of the camera. But when his ambition turned dark, when his ego began to consume every act of kindness, she and Keanu had walked away. Daniel had called it betrayal. Now, years later, he had found a new way to turn their silence into his script. When she finally reached the hotel, Keanu was waiting by the entrance, soaked from the rain, his expression steady but urgent. She rushed toward him, her breath short, her hair sticking to her face. "You know," she said quietly. He nodded. "Tom called. Then you know what he's planning." Keanu's eyes darkened slightly. "He wants revenge. Not just for the past, but for the silence we gave him." They stood there under the awning, the rain falling hard just beyond their reach. The sound filled the space between their words. "He wants us to break," Sandra said, her voice trembling. "He wants the world to think we're liars. He wants them to doubt every good thing we've ever done." Keanu looked at her, calm but resolute. "Then we don't give him what he wants." "How?" she asked. "He has everything. Footage, fake messages, stories that sound true." "He has noise," Keanu said softly. "We have truth." But truth, as they both knew, wasn't always enough. Later that night, in the quiet of their suite, Keanu sat with a notebook open on the table. Sandra watched him from across the room. His handwriting was slow, deliberate. He wasn't planning a defense. He was writing something else, something raw and human. "What are you doing?" she asked gently. He looked up. "Writing our story. Not the one the world thinks it knows. The real one, before it gets rewritten for us." His voice was low, steady, but filled with a quiet determination that made her chest tighten. He handed her the notebook. On the first page, written simply, were the words, "We walked through noise and stayed kind." She smiled faintly through the ache in her chest. "You really believe people will listen?" "Not all," he said softly. "But enough." She took the pen from him and sat down. Together they began to write, not a statement, not an explanation, but memories. Moments that were too small for cameras to capture. The laughter between takes, the long walks after shoots, the quiet ways they had helped crew members who never spoke of it. They wrote it all down, page after page, until dawn began to break behind the curtains. As the sun rose, the city outside started to buzz again. Notifications, messages, headlines. The countdown to Daniel's so-called documentary had begun. By mid-morning, news outlets were already talking about it. Previews leaked online, filled with dramatic music and half-truths. One clip even used their voices from an old interview, edited to sound like an argument. People shared it everywhere. Sandra's phone kept ringing, but she ignored it. She sat with Keanu, reading what they had written together. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't polished, but it was honest. Finally, she looked up at him and said, "Let's share it." He nodded. They decided to publish the story as an open letter. No publicist, no editing, no media spin. Just their words, handwritten and photographed exactly as it was. They posted it online with one caption: "For anyone who still believes in kindness." The post went live at noon. Within an hour, it spread everywhere. People began reading, sharing, and commenting, not with gossip, but with emotion. Fans wrote about how their letter reminded them of empathy, of how fame shouldn't erase humanity. Other celebrities quietly reposted it with words of support. For the first time in weeks, the tide began to shift. The world saw not a scandal, but two people choosing truth without anger. But Daniel Cross wasn't done. That evening, only hours before his documentary's release, he went live on social media for the first time in years. His face appeared on screens everywhere, older, sharper, still carrying that air of control he was known for. He spoke calmly, pretending innocence, claiming his project was meant to show the real price of fame. He accused them of lying to the public, of acting humble for the camera. And then he said something that made Sandra's blood run cold. "The footage you've seen," he said, "is only part of what we have. Tomorrow the full version releases, and when it does, you'll see what they've both been hiding for years." Keanu turned off the screen. "He's bluffing," he said quietly. But even he didn't sound certain. That night, neither of them slept. Sandra sat by the window, her thoughts heavy. She could see flashes of the past, Daniel shouting on set, throwing scripts, twisting words. He had always known how to control stories, how to manipulate people's weaknesses. Around 3 a.m., there was a knock on the door. Keanu opened it cautiously. It was Tom, looking exhausted but determined. "I found something," he said. "He doesn't just have the footage. He has a file, an old recording from the set where you both walked out. He's edited it to make it look like you were responsible for what happened next." Sandra's heart pounded. "What happened next?" Tom hesitated. "One of the crew members had a breakdown after you left. Daniel blamed it on you. He's using that to prove you ruined his life." The words hit hard. She remembered that day clearly, the chaos, the shouting, the guilt that lingered even though she had done nothing wrong. She had always blamed herself quietly, even though she knew the truth. Keanu reached out, holding her hand. Don't let him take that from you again, he said softly, but she looked up, her voice shaking. He already did, once. Then, a moment later, she straightened. Her eyes hardened with something that hadn't been there before, resolve. No, she said firmly, not again. She stood up, grabbing her coat. Keanu frowned. Where are you going? To him, she said. He wants me to break. I'm going to let him see that I won't. Keanu stood too. Then I'm coming with you. They drove through the empty streets just before dawn, following Tom's directions to a warehouse on the edge of the city where Daniel's team was working. The air smelled of wet metal and dust. When they entered, the place was filled with screens and equipment. Daniel Cross stood in the middle of it all, looking exactly like the ghost they remembered. Eyes sharp, smile controlled, hands in his pockets as if he had been waiting for them. You came, he said calmly. I was wondering when you would. Sandra took a step forward, her voice steady. Stop this, Daniel, it's gone too far, he chuckled softly. Too far, you walked off my set and destroyed my career. This is balance. You destroyed yourself, Keanu said quietly, and you're still doing it. Daniel turned to him with a smirk. Maybe, but at least the world will remember my name again. He gestured toward the monitors. The documentary was already queued for release. The screen showed the old footage, edited and twisted, seconds away from being uploaded. Sandra's heart pounded. Don't do this, she said. You think pain will make you remembered. But it won't, it'll only make you lonelier. For the first time, Daniel's expression faltered. Something flickered in his eyes, doubt maybe, or regret. Keanu stepped closer, his voice calm but firm. You can still stop this. Just once choose peace. The silence stretched. Daniel's finger hovered over the keyboard. Rain pattered softly against the metal roof. Then slowly he lowered his hand. Get out, he said quietly. Before I change my mind. They left without looking back. When dawn broke again, the city felt lighter. Daniel never released the documentary. No one knew why. Some said he lost funding. Others said he disappeared. Sandra and Keanu never spoke of that night again. But something changed in them. Something stronger than fear, softer than victory. They had faced a storm built from lies and walked through it with grace. But just when peace began to return, something unexpected arrived in their inbox. A new message. No name, no threat, just one line. This isn't over. He wasn't the only one watching. The Shadow Network morning sunlight spilled through the blinds, bright and cold, yet it carried no warmth. The message still glowed on Keanu's phone screen, that single sentence that turned relief into dread. This isn't over. He wasn't the only one watching. Sandra stood behind him, arms crossed tightly as if to hold herself together. She had barely slept. For hours, they both sat in silence, listening to the quiet hum of the city below, waiting for something, maybe clarity, maybe calm, that never came. Keanu finally placed the phone on the table, his face calm but unreadable. Whoever sent this wants us scared, he said. Well, it's working, Sandra whispered. Her voice trembled, not from weakness but from exhaustion. For weeks they had lived inside noise, flashes, headlines, manipulations, and just when they thought it was over, another shadow appeared. What if Daniel wasn't working alone? She asked softly. Keanu looked at her, his eyes narrowing slightly. You think someone funded him? She nodded. It makes sense. He couldn't have managed the servers, the drones, the timing. Someone bigger wanted this to happen. Keanu didn't answer, but the thought sank into him like a stone into deep water. He reached for his phone again and called Tom. Trace the message, he said simply. Tom's sigh came through the line. Already tried. Whoever sent it used a dark relay, but I found something strange. Your names, both of yours, are part of a metadata string that connects to a network of digital accounts used to leak celebrity footage. Sandra frowned. You mean paparazzi? No, Tom said quietly. This is different. They don't sell pictures. They manipulate narratives. Every time a scandal goes viral, they profit through hidden sponsorships and ad farms. It's organized almost like a machine. Keanu's expression hardened. And now they've chosen us. Yes, Tom said, because your story brings them the one thing money can't buy, emotion, truth that feels real enough to break hearts. After the call ended, silence returned. Sandra walked toward the window and looked down at the street. People were moving like normal, smiling, talking, living, completely unaware of the invisible strings being pulled above them. They're using kindness as currency, she said softly. That's the cruelest part. Keanu joined her, his voice quiet but firm. Then we stop being their story, she turned to him. And how do we do that? By turning the lens back on them, he said. If they feed on attention, we take it away. But we can't do it with words. We have to show the truth. He looked at her with that steady calm that had carried them through everything so far. We go to the source. Within hours, Tom had traced a possible link, an abandoned media startup in Los Angeles called Nova Pulse, a front company that had gone silent years ago but was recently reactivated. Its name appeared in several metadata chains connected to the leaked videos. That night, Keanu and Sandra drove together to the address. The city lights blurred past them, neon reflections painting the windshield in flickers of blue and gold. As they approached the building, it became clear that abandoned wasn't entirely true. Faint light glowed behind the tinted glass, and a sleek black car was parked outside. "Someone's here," Sandra whispered. Keanu nodded. "Stay close." They slipped through a side entrance left slightly ajar. Inside, the air smelled of dust and faint electricity. Old film posters lined the walls, forgotten dreams from another era. They moved carefully down a dim corridor until voices echoed from a room at the end. A man and a woman were talking, their tones calm, businesslike. "The reaction metrics are higher than expected," the man said. "Phase 2 will bring in double." "And what about Reeves and Bullock?" the woman asked. The man chuckled. "They've done most of the work for us. Public sympathy means engagement. Next week we shift to the next target." Keanu's jaw tightened. He stepped closer just enough to see them through the half-open door. The man was in his 40s, wearing a dark suit and earpiece. The woman typed rapidly on a laptop, surrounded by glowing monitors displaying social media dashboards and graphs. On one screen, he saw his own name, connected by arrows to other celebrities, lines of data linking one story to another. "They're tracking everything," Sandra whispered. Keanu turned to her. "They're manufacturing emotion." Suddenly, the floor creaked beneath their feet. The woman looked up, alert. "Did you hear that?" The man turned sharply, eyes narrowing toward the door. Keanu grabbed Sandra's hand, pulling her behind a pillar as footsteps approached. The man stepped out, scanning the corridor. "Someone's here," he muttered. "Check the feed." The woman began typing again. Keanu's pulse quickened. They needed to get out before the cameras caught them. But just as they turned to leave, a familiar voice spoke from deeper inside the room. "Don't bother looking. They're already here." Sandra froze. It was Daniel Cross, his voice calm, almost amused. The man and woman hesitated. Daniel stepped into view, looking at the monitors with a faint smile. "They think they're saving themselves," he said. "But they've already given us the ending we needed." Keanu's breath slowed. Daniel wasn't just a pawn, he was working with them. Sandra looked at him, whispering, "We have to expose this." Keanu nodded. But before they could move, a red light blinked above them. A hidden camera turned toward their corner. "They see us," Keanu whispered. The monitors flickered. On one of the screens, their faces appeared, grainy but clear. The woman smirked. "Showtime," she said. Within seconds, alarms blared, doors locked automatically. Daniel turned, his expression cold. "I told you both this wasn't over." Keanu stepped out from hiding, pulling Sandra behind him. "What do you want?" Daniel smiled faintly. "Not money, not fame, just proof that the good ones fall too. The world believes in you both too easily. I'm here to fix that illusion." "You call that truth?" Keanu asked quietly. "I call it balance," Daniel replied. "You built your careers on kindness. I'm showing the cost of pretending it's real." Sandra's voice trembled with anger. "You're wrong. Kindness isn't a mask. It's the one thing that survives when everything else breaks." For a moment, Daniel's expression shifted. Something flickered behind his eyes, pain, regret, but it disappeared as quickly as it came. "Maybe," he said softly, "but not for long." Then the power cut out. The lights went dark, replaced by emergency red glows. Keanu grabbed Sandra's hand. "Run!" They dashed through the hall, guided by the faint exit signs. Behind them, voices shouted, footsteps pounding. The building seemed to close in around them, corridors twisting like a maze. Finally, they burst through a side door into the alley behind the building. The rain had started again, hard and relentless. They ran until the sounds faded behind them. When they finally stopped, breathless and soaked, Sandra leaned against the wall, trembling. "What now?" she asked. Keanu looked back toward the distant glow of the building. "Now we show the world what we saw." But he knew it wouldn't be easy. The network controlled the narrative. They could twist even the truth to look false. "We'll need proof," he said. "Real proof. And people who believe it," Sandra added softly. He nodded. "Then we start with one person who already does." Tom back at the hotel, they handed him everything they remembered, the names, the layout, the dialogue, the screens. Tom worked through the night tracing the data trails. Every path led deeper into a web of shell companies and fake accounts, each one feeding the next. By dawn, he looked up, his face pale. "This is bigger than I thought," he said quietly. The same network is behind dozens of fake stories. Actors, politicians, even humanitarian figures. They create chaos to control attention, and they're untouchable because people believe what they feel, not what's true. Sandra sat down slowly. So we can't win, Tom shook his head. You can, but not by fighting them, by exposing how they work. Keanu leaned forward. We make them visible. Exactly, Tom said. If they hide in shadows, we turn on the light. They spent the next 2 days preparing a plan. Tom would compile digital evidence, while Keanu and Sandra would film a raw, unedited conversation. No makeup, no script, no production. Just honesty. They would talk about manipulation, about how truth can be stolen and rewritten. When the video went live, it wasn't dramatic. No music, no editing. Just two people sitting in silence before Keanu began speaking. He said, "We've been watched, edited, rewritten, but we're still here, and so are you. Every time you share without knowing, someone profits from your emotion. Maybe it's time we stop feeding the noise." Sandra followed, her voice calm and fragile. "We're not perfect, we've made mistakes, but we're not actors in someone else's lie. We're just people trying to be kind in a world that profits from cruelty." The video went viral within hours, not because of scandal, but because of its quiet power. People began sharing it not with gossip, but with reflection. Even journalists started questioning the network of manipulation behind celebrity stories. For a moment, it felt like light had finally broken through the fog. But the victory was short-lived. 2 nights later, as Keanu and Sandra prepared to leave the city for some peace, Tom called again, his voice shaky. "They're erasing everything," he said. "Our videos being flagged across multiple platforms, the network striking back." "Can you stop it?" Keanu asked. Tom hesitated. "Maybe, but if I keep tracing, they'll find me too." "Then stop," Keanu said. "Don't risk it." But Tom didn't listen. He kept working. An hour later, the call disconnected. When they tried calling him back, there was no answer. Sandra looked at Keanu, her face pale. "What if they got to him?" Keanu's eyes darkened. "Then this goes deeper than we thought." Outside, the city lights flickered faintly against the rain. Somewhere in that glow, the truth was still hiding, and someone was willing to bury it for good. The final truth: the city slept under rain that night, but in one quiet hotel room, two people sat wide awake. Keanu stared at Tom's last message again and again, as if the pixels might reveal more than the words. "They're erasing everything." Then nothing. Silence. No follow-up, no trace, no goodbye. Sandra sat beside him, her hands folded tightly in her lap. Her eyes were red, not from tears, but from exhaustion. "We have to find him," she whispered. Keanu nodded, standing slowly. "And we have to finish what he started." The weight of those words hung in the room like fog. The air felt charged, full of something neither of them could name. Fear, yes, but also a strange kind of strength. They had been hunted, lied about, cornered, yet somehow beneath all of it they were still standing. By dawn, Keanu was already driving through the city. Sandra sat beside him, holding her phone tightly. Tom's last known location pinged near a storage warehouse outside downtown. As they approached, the sky grew lighter, streaks of soft gold breaking through the clouds. The world was waking up, unaware of the quiet war being fought between truth and illusion. The warehouse stood alone at the edge of an empty street, its faded walls soaked from rain. The gate was open just enough for them to slip through. The inside was dim, filled with old electronics, discarded servers, and stacks of boxes covered in dust. Then faintly from the corner of the room came a flicker of blue light. A laptop screen. Sandra gasped softly. "That's his!" They rushed forward. On the screen, a single window was open, Tom's last active trace. An encrypted file half uploaded to a secure drive. It was labeled TruthCore Zip. Beside it, a small note stuck to the table in his handwriting. "If you're reading this, I found them. Finish it." Sandra's voice broke slightly. He knew they'd come for him. Keanu looked around the room. It was too quiet, too still, the kind of silence that warns before it hits. "We have to move fast," he said. He inserted a drive and began copying the file. Progress bar 5%, 10, 20. Outside, thunder rolled in the distance. "What if they find us here?" Sandra whispered. "Then we make sure it's worth it," Keanu said. The percentage climbed 50, 60, 70. Each second felt heavier than the one before. Sandra glanced around, the faint hum of old lights filling the air. Then suddenly a door creaked open somewhere behind them. Footsteps echoed. Slow, deliberate, Keanu's body tensed. He turned, eyes sharp. "We're not alone." A shadow moved across the far wall, then another. Two figures stepped into the light, one of them the man from the Nova Pulse building, the same cold expression etched across his face. Beside him, the woman with the laptop, her gaze fixed, unreadable. "You shouldn't have come," the man said calmly. "This was never your fight." Keanu stood in front of Sandra. "You made it ours," the man sighed. "You don't understand how the system works. Truth doesn't matter anymore. People only see what they want to feel. We give them that. We control the heartbeat of attention. You can't stop something that big." "Then maybe we don't have to stop it," Keanu said quietly. "We just have to show what it really is." The man's smirk faded. "You won't make it out with that file." Keanu glanced at the screen. 93%, just a little more. The woman stepped forward, pulling a small device from her pocket. "One press and that system wipes clean." Sandra spoke suddenly, her voice trembling but steady. "You think people can't change? That we won't see what's real if you let us? Maybe you're wrong. Maybe the world still wants something pure." For a moment, the woman hesitated. Her eyes flicked to Sandra, something human flickering behind the mask. Then the man barked, "Do it." But before she could press the button, the laptop chimed softly, "Upload complete." Keanu grabbed the drive, sliding it into his pocket. "Too late," he said. The man lunged forward, but Keanu pushed a metal crate between them. It hit the ground with a loud crash. Sandra grabbed his arm, and together they ran for the side door. Shouts echoed behind them, heavy boots chasing through puddles. They burst outside into the rain, sprinting toward the car. Thunder cracked overhead, lightning illuminating their faces, determined, breathless, alive. As they drove off, the warehouse grew smaller in the mirror, swallowed by the storm. Keanu's grip on the steering wheel was tight, his jaw set. "Where now?" Sandra asked. "The Truth Core servers," he said. "Tom built them off-grid. If we can finish his upload, the data will be public. Every fake account, every manipulation, all of it." "And if they find us first?" Keanu glanced at her, his expression softening. "Then we've already done enough." The road wound through empty fields, rain streaking the windows like tears on glass. The world felt both vast and fragile. By afternoon, they reached the remote cabin where Tom had hidden the servers. Inside, the lights flickered weakly, powered by a generator still humming faintly. The walls were lined with hard drives and monitors, screens filled with lines of encrypted code. Sandra stared at the setup. "He built all this alone," Keanu nodded, "because he believed someone still cared about truth." He connected the drive and began the final upload. Data scrolled fast across the screens, unlocking layers of corruption that spread like veins through digital networks. Every lie, every forged narrative, every manipulated image, visible, traceable, undeniable. As the upload neared completion, the screens began to flicker, external interference. They were being tracked again. "They found us," Sandra whispered. Keanu's fingers moved faster. "Just a few more seconds." Then, with a faint beep, the upload finished. The data went live, spreading to open-source networks worldwide. It couldn't be contained now. The lights flickered out completely. Silence. Then the sound of rain against the windows again. Keanu leaned back, breathing heavily. Sandra turned toward him. For a long moment, neither spoke. There was no triumph, no cheers, just quiet. "It's done," she said softly. "It's done," he echoed. A few hours later, the internet began to shift. News outlets hesitated to publish. Anonymous reports appeared, showing the manipulation network collapsing. Accounts vanished overnight. The world, for once, started asking questions instead of swallowing answers. And through it all, Keanu and Sandra stayed quiet. They didn't claim victory. They didn't appear on camera. They simply disappeared from public view. Weeks later, somewhere far from Hollywood, they sat together on a wooden bench overlooking the ocean. The air was calm, the sky clear. No cameras, no lights, just waves whispering against the shore. Sandra looked at him, her voice gentle. "Do you think it mattered?" Keanu smiled faintly. "Maybe not to everyone, but to someone somewhere it did, and that's enough." She leaned her head on his shoulder. "Tom would have liked this view." "Yeah," Keanu said softly. "He believed in light." They sat there quietly as the sun began to set, painting the sky in soft gold. In that stillness, they found something they had been chasing all along, not fame, not control, but peace. The world would move on. New stories, new noise, new distractions. But somewhere in the digital sea, truth had survived. Not loud, not perfect, but alive. And maybe that was all it ever needed to be. As the waves crashed gently below, Sandra whispered, "Maybe kindness is the only truth that never dies." Keanu nodded. "And maybe silence isn't weakness. Maybe it's strength waiting to be understood." The camera of life pulled back in imagination, two figures sitting hand in hand against the fading light. The world watching, not with flashes or headlines this time, but with quiet hearts that remembered what grace looked like.